Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 1, Part 7. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. Cheers and bellows filled the air. And the stadium was packed full. The day had finally come. And everyone was going to be tested. The sports festival was up and running. The stands were filled to the brim with both pro heroes and hero fans alike. But one stood out more than any other. It was none other than the unlicensed hero himself. And he looked like he wasn't enjoying himself. Omni-Man, long time no see. A proud and booming voice then said, prompting the unlicensed hero to look and see who it was. It was none other than All Might. And his trademarked smile made for the perfect contrast to Omni-Man's expression. Oh, it's you, All Might, Nolan responded, sounding unamused and maybe a little annoyed. The blonde hero was confused by his tone of voice, because Nolan is usually a very friendly person. Now, however, it seemed as if there was something that was bugging him. I don't mean to intrude, but is everything all right? You look like you don't want to be here. Aren't you excited to watch your son's performance? All Might asked, his booming voice showing a clear hint of concern. Nolan just sighed upon hearing this, as he answered by saying, I'm fine. I just don't see the point in any of this. Why should Izuku participate when he clearly is leagues above everyone else? With a voice that showed his annoyance more prominently, All Might was once again thrown off by this. He had expected Nolan to be more excited, but he clearly wasn't. He was so convinced that his son would win that he couldn't bring himself to enjoy being here. Nolan maybe had a good reason to think this way. Izuku was very powerful after all, but All Might still thought that he looked down upon everyone too much. I'm not denying young Izuku's strength, but I think that you're underestimating his classmates. Nolan, there are many strong students, and I believe that some of them are on the same level as your son, All Might then said, sounding just as proud as before. He wasn't just saying those words to try and set Nolan straight. He actually believed it. The blonde hero was confident in Class 1A's ability to stand on even ground with Izuku, or he was sure about two of them at least. Nolan's expression went from one of unamusement and annoyance to one of pure confusion, as he looked towards All Might and said, Izuku and his classmates being on the same level? That has to be the funniest joke you have said since, well, ever. With a voice that both mirrored his confusion and made a mockery of All Might's previous statement, All Might was even more shocked to hear Nolan say this. To him, the idea of anyone being just as strong as Izuku was laughable. He didn't even think before saying it. But the blonde hero didn't let these words get to his head. He knew that Izuku would find some challengers, and that he would find them to be pretty strong. He was sure that someone could match the green-haired boy, unless it turned out that Nolan's arrogance had been for a good reason. Meanwhile, the students of Class 1 were in the locker room. Some were happily conversing, some were preparing themselves, and some were just being completely silent. Among the silent ones was Izuku, sitting on a chair next to a table by himself. It wasn't that he was nervous or needed any preparation. He was just trying to abide his time in peace. Hey, Midoriya, a voice then called out, disrupting the so-called peace that the green-haired boy was enjoying. Izuku turned towards the speaker, seeing who it was. Need something, Todoroki? The green-haired boy asked, his voice and expression being neutral as he remained in his seat. These words brought the attention of everyone in the room, as Todoroki stared Izuku down. I acknowledge your strength. Only a fool wouldn't do that after seeing what you did at the USJ. You're also Omni-Man's son, so you are indeed a formidable foe, but that is just another reason for me to defeat you, the bi-colored teen said, his voice being as cold as ice. Most reacted to this in a strange way, because it sounded like Todoroki was challenging Izuku. Sure, the entirety of the class had more or less already done so, but that was more like a friendly challenge between comrades and sportsmen. This, however, wasn't a friendly challenge. It was an outright declaration of war. The green-haired boy didn't even blink after hearing Todoroki's words, as he responded by saying, if you want to declare war, you're too late. Your fellow classmates have already done so. With the same neutral voice, the bi-colored teen looked unaffected, as he said, I know that, but this is different. They're claiming that they will try to defeat, but I won't try. I will defeat you, Midoriya. With a voice that was far more intimidating than before, Izuku was once again unaffected, as he rested his elbows on the table and closed his eyes. Everyone was shocked by this action. It wasn't just that Izuku didn't seem to care about Todoroki's declaration. He looked like he was trying to sleep. The bi-colored teen was shocked by this, as he said, what, don't you have anything to say? With a voice that was a mixture between the shock and the previous cold, Izuku clearly heard Todoroki, but he didn't give an answer. He just remained silent, and his eyes were still closed. This action just made Todoroki furious. As he shouted, "Answer me, yo," but was immediately cut off by the sound of a loud slam. Everyone turned their heads, only to be both shocked and horrified when they saw what it was. It was the table. It had been broken completely. They all wondered what had caused it, but they already knew the answer to that question. Everyone's expression turned to Izuku, who hadn't changed his position at all. His arms were in the air, as if his elbows were resting on an invisible table, making them all realize that he must have broken the table with nothing but a push from his elbows. They noticed how his eyes were open now, and in them they could see nothing but pure annoyance. Todoroki was speechless by this sudden turn of events. As his eyes were locked onto Izuku, he then watched as the green-haired boy got up from his seat for the first time since they got here. Before he began floating towards him, Izuku was just a mere centimeters away from Todoroki now, his expression being cold as he hovered just 1 centimeter over the ground. Then he said, "Keep babbling your nonsense, you multicolored ant. It'll just make it more satisfying to crush you," with a voice that showed clear disdain for the person in front of him. Everyone hearing this was once again stunned, for it was not like the Izuku they knew. He's usually very friendly, but now he was different. He was cold and arrogant, looking down on his opponent. Class 1 were very confused by the situation, but some of them came to a horrifying conclusion. They haven't known each other for that long, so they wouldn't tell if someone was behaving as they always do or not. This left them with an equally horrifying probability. Since they don't actually know how Izuku normally behaves, they can't fully say that they know him. The friendly side of him could just be a mask that he puts on, while behind him lies his real and arrogant behavior. This, coupled with how strong he is, makes him even more terrifying, maybe even comparable to a villain. The class was then told to enter the arena for the opening ceremony, which was followed by a short speech from Izuku. After that, the first game was announced, and it was an obstacle race. Nolan kept his eyes on his son, watching his every move without showing any expression. "Well, I wish the best of luck to your son," All Might then said, breaking the silence between them. Nolan barely reacted to this as he turned to look at the blonde hero, only to be caught off guard. All Might was holding his hand out for a handshake, his smile being just as bright as before. Nolan was surprised by this, and for a second he didn't know how to react, but eventually he gave in by shaking the blonde hero's hand and saying, "Luck won't affect the results. He wouldn't need it even if it did. Izuku's victory is set in stone, with or without luck." With a voice that was a little more friendly than before. All Might had gotten used to Nolan's behavior by now, as he smiled even more while saying, "We'll just have to wait and see what happens." With his usual proud voice, Nolan didn't respond to this. He just took it. He still firmly believed that Izuku would win, but he also knew that All Might would never admit that Izuku had no way of losing. The two then turned their attention back to the students, watching them all prepare themselves. Nolan's eyes were still locked onto Izuku, trying to see what he would do. The green-haired boy was calm and neutral, to what was almost an alarming degree. He stood there with his eyes closed, looking like he didn't care to prepare himself, and waiting for the race to start already. The arena was filled with a thick and deafening silence, so tense that it felt like it lasted for hours, until it was suddenly broken when President Mike shouted, "Start!" The students didn't stop to think after hearing this, as they all rushed ahead in a wild hurry. They all ran through a corridor, only to realize that it was too cramped, as everyone got stuck and struggled to break themselves free. Izuku remained still without reaction. All Might wondered what the green-haired boy was doing, for it looked like he wasn't even going to compete. Nolan, on the other hand, knew exactly what Izuku was doing. It may have looked like he wasn't paying any attention, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The green-haired boy was fully aware of his surroundings, and he had even foreseen this. He knew that this was going to happen, so he decided to wait instead of getting trapped by the mass of students. That way he could pass through the gate without any form of hassle. Todoroki was one of those who got trapped in the corridor and struggled to get out. He wasn't making any progress. No one was, and it started getting on his nerves. Eventually he had enough and froze the entirety of the hallway, making everyone unable to move. The bicolored team then managed to get through everyone and started to run, until he was suddenly knocked over by a powerful gust of wind. It wasn't just him who was knocked over, so was everyone else, even though they were frozen. They didn't know what caused it, but they had an idea when they thought that they could see something flying past them at super speed. Todoroki dragged himself up to his feet before observing his surroundings. Everyone was on the ground, and a thick cloud of dust filled the area. The dust made it hard to see anything that was further away than just a few meters. But despite this, the bicolored team thought that he could see the cause of this chaos in the distance. It was no more than a speck, but it was enough for him to identify what had caused this. In the distance, he could see a faint green speck, so far away that no one would be able to identify it. He, on the other hand, knew who it was. And that is what frustrated him. He knew who it was. And he just realized that he had just lost to that person by a wide margin. The obstacle race ended up being a battle for second place. For first place had been taken by none other than Izuku. Todoroki clawed his way up to second place, with Bakugo hot on his trail in third place. The remainder of the students dropped in one after another, until it had finally ended. Izuku was patiently waiting that entire time, sitting cross-legged while hovering in the air. "Well done, Deku. You finished the course in just a few seconds," Uraraka exclaimed, showering her praise on the green-haired boy. Izuku remained cold upon hearing this, but his voice still showed some hint of gratitude as he responded by saying, "It was no big deal." Uraraka didn't know how to feel about his response. On one side, he showed a hint of the same kind of joy she recognized him for, but on the other end, he was still cold and arrogant. The brown-haired girl felt conflicted, but her thoughts were interrupted when Midnight was ready to announce the second round. The R-rated hero spun a massive wheel until it finally landed on a section that read Cavalry Battle. The explanation was short and simple. The students would make up teams, with a minimum of 2 and maximum of 4 members. Each team would be given a headband that corresponded to the amount of points that the team was worth, and the game itself centered around taking the headbands from various other teams. The teams with the most points by the end would advance to the third round. Everyone understood the game and began making various different plans, until it was announced that the person who got first place in the obstacle race was worth 10 million points. Izuku could feel how everyone stared him down with malicious intent, but he didn't care. To him, they were just another obstacle to overcome. The students were then given time to build their teams, and a lot of people started to swarm over Izuku. This came as a surprise to him, considering that he was the biggest target, but it also made sense when considering the fact that he had shown how powerful he was. "Deku, wanna be in the same team?" Uraraka asked with a friendly tone. Izuku didn't get to respond until another spoke up. "Hi, can I join your team?" an energetic voice asked. Izuku turned to see that it was a girl with pink hair, holding some strange gadget in her hands. "Midoriya, may I join your team?" a third voice then said, not letting the green-haired boy speak between each of them. It was Takoyami, and he sounded stoic as usual. "Yeah, sure, you guys can join my team," Izuku then said, sounding incredibly unamused. The other three were both confused and shocked. As Uraraka spoke once more, "You didn't even need to think about it?" the brown-haired girl asked, voicing everyone's confusion over the matter. Izuku was still hovering with his legs crossed, as he boldly answered, "Honestly, with what I plan on doing, it doesn't really matter who's on my team." With the same calm voice as before, the others were confused once again, for to them it sounded like Izuku had a plan that didn't involve any form of teamwork. Uraraka wanted to question him about it more, but she then decided against it. Whatever it was that he had planned, she had faith in Izuku. She trusted that he had a well-thought-out plan. Some more time passed, and everyone had their teams built. Izuku stood with his team, looking as unamused as before, while everyone was staring him down. Silence filled the air once more, until it was broken by Present Mike. "Start," the loud hero shouted, prompting everyone to move. They all seemed to advance on a mutual target, Team Midoriya, and that team was unsure of what to do. "I'm not trying to be pushy, but now would be a good time to fill us in on your plan," Takoyami exclaimed, sounding incredibly worried by the horde that was approaching them. "You guys won't need to do anything. Just sit and wait until time runs out," the green-haired boy said. Everyone was confused by his words and were about to shout in anger, but they all stopped upon seeing what he did next. Before any other team could get close enough to pose a danger, Izuku began hovering into the air. They all watched as he went higher and higher up, eventually getting to the point where no one had the slightest bit of hop to reach him. "Right. I keep forgetting that he can do that," Uraraka exclaimed, shock and dumbfounded realization being present in her voice. "Same here," Takoyami then responded, his voice almost sounding the same. As Izuku reached a height that he deemed satisfactory, he could hear the angry shouts of the other contestants, all claiming that he was cheating. It would seem that Midoriya has taken flight, leaving the rest of his team behind. This looks to be very unfair. And is it even allowed? Present Mike asked, his voice booming through the speakers. The complaints kept raging on from below, as Aizawa grabbed the mic and said, "As long as he doesn't touch the ground, it is allowed. And yes, this is very unfair to the others. But that's just the way it is." With his usual tired voice, the contestants shut their complaints upon hearing this, as they turned their pleading expressions towards Aizawa. "Sorry, we didn't think of adding a height limit to this game," the tired teacher then added, showing no mercy to the students. Everyone gave up on their attempts to defeat Izuku, realizing that he could just wait the time out and get first place. As such, the cavalry battle became a contest for second place. Again, Nolan observed the entire event in silence, not showing any hint of emotion. He still thought that this entire ordeal was pointless. But based on the circumstances, he was pleased with Izuku's approach. It would seem that young Izuku intends to take the path of a pacifist, All Might then said, once again disturbing the silence between them. Nolan didn't let his eyes off of Izuku, as he responded by saying, "He's taking my lessons to heart and avoids combat if possible." With a calm voice, All Might was surprised to hear this. He didn't expect Nolan to teach this to his son, but he quickly realized that it was a good thing. Izuku is strong enough to kill someone if not careful, so having refrained from using said strength unless necessary would reduce the chance of causing needless destruction. The blonde hero also realized something else. This wasn't the first time that Izuku had done this. He had done the same during the battle simulation, by avoiding confrontation with Bakugo. All Might was deep in thought, leading him to respect Izuku even more, until he was broken out of said thoughts. It was the sound of a loud bang, an explosion. The blonde knew what was the cause of these explosions, but he was still shocked when he turned his gaze towards it. What he saw was a long chain of explosions that grew vertically, and atop of that chain was an angry ashen blonde teen. "Deku," the voice of Bakugo bellowed, as he finally reached up to the unsuspecting greenette. Izuku didn't register Bakugo's presence until he was just a few inches in front of him. But even then he didn't move. He knew that nothing Bakugo did could hurt or affect him, so there was no need to do anything. But this exact thought is what would bring upon his downfall. The blonde grabbed onto the green-haired boy with a firm grip, aiming to take the latter's headband. Izuku looked unamused, until something odd happened. Bakugo had managed to move him. Even though he was supposed to be much weaker than him, he managed to move him off balance. Izuku was confused and shocked, unable to understand what was happening. The blonde was suddenly much stronger than he used to be, much stronger than he should be. The green-haired boy went through many possibilities of what it could be, but none of them made any sense. This left him with one conclusion. Whatever gave Bakugo this strength was something that he kept secret from everyone. Not only that, it might have something to do with his connection to All Might. Izuku was off balance and began stalling towards the ground. Bakugo saw this as his opportunity, as he reached for the headband while shouting, "I've got you," as he got closer to the headband, but was suddenly stopped. When this happened, he also realized that they had stopped falling, which could only mean one thing. Bakugo looked ahead, only to be met by the furious eyes of Izuku. The green-haired boy was holding onto Bakugo's hand with a firm grip, as an intense fire was burning behind his eyes. "Go back to the earth that you came from," the green-haired boy shouted, as he threw the blonde towards the ground. Bakugo began falling at an alarming rate. As he attempted to stabilize himself, he would lose if he touched the ground, but his explosions did not help him in the slightest. He got closer and closer to the dirt, beginning to panic towards the end. But his save and grace came in the form of a shout. "Time's up," Present Mike announced, just moments before the blonde crashed into the pavement below. Bakugo's team breathed a heavy sigh of relief, as Izuku slowly descended towards the ground. The green-haired boy looked like he had been shocked, and his teammates noticed it very clearly. They wanted to ask him about it, but none of them knew how to break the ice. That is when Uraraka decided to speak up. "That was a much closer win than I imagined," the brown-haired girl, trying to sound as comforting and friendly as possible. Izuku looked at her, his expression as calm as he could manage, as he said, "He was much stronger than anticipated. It caught me off guard. There's nothing else to it." With a voice that tried to remain as calm as possible, Uraraka sensed that Izuku was telling the truth, but she sensed something else at the same time. She sensed a particular feeling within the green-haired boy, that he thought that he was going to lose, and it made her concerned for him. Team Midoriya remained silent for a while, until it was broken by someone else who walked up and said, "Midoriya, we need to talk." With a cold voice, the green-haired boy didn't need to turn around to know that this was Todoroki, but he wondered what he needed. He didn't decide to object, however, as he followed the bi-colored teen out of the arena. All Might was sweating bullets during that entire exchange. He couldn't tell how it was going to turn out, and Bakugo had managed to throw Izuku off balance. And it made his proud smile even wider. "Well, it looks like young Bakugo might be evenly matched with your son," the blonde hero said, sounding just as joyous as before. Nolan was silent for a few seconds after hearing this, but All Might could tell by his expression that he wasn't happy. The unlicensed hero then sighed annoyance, as he said, "Pathetic," with an agitated voice. Before walking away, All Might was once again thrown off by this, for he couldn't tell who Nolan was directing his malice towards. Was he directing it to other contestants who couldn't do anything? To Bakugo, who ended up being saved by what could be described as divine intervention? Or did direct it towards his own son for struggling against Bakugo? He really couldn't tell. Outro. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video. So goodbye and have a divine day.